We're in a whole different universe this time, or a different reality anyway. Welcome back. This is Sean's Take on Things. I am your host, Sean Redmond. Today we are talking about Constellation, episode 6, entitled Paul is Dead. This is your spoiler warning. From here, I'll assume you've either seen the episode or don't mind if I spoil it. I will also be using clips from the show, as is allowed in the fair use provision of the copyright laws of 1976. Let's dig in. So I'm going to start a little different. I'm going to do a little explanation first, and then we'll get into sort of what happened. One, the explanation. Paul is Dead is not only fitting because we're talking about the astronaut from the reality we're used to watching being dead and Joe being alive. We are now in the other reality where Paul is alive and Joe is dead. But Paul is Dead is also a legendarily famous conspiracy theory that Paul McCartney died in the mid-60s in a car accident, and the surviving Beatles and the record company staged a Paul McCartney lookalike contest in which a man from Canada named Billy Shears won. And then Billy Shears disappeared from the planet and became Paul McCartney. And Paul is Dead is a thing. You can search the internet and fall down the rabbit hole. It's why Paul McCartney is barefoot crossing Abbey Road on Abbey Road. Paul is Dead was supposed to be in the backward spinning of one of the songs. There's a lot of Paul is Dead things. 1 and 1 and 1 is 3. That guy right there, Paul McCartney. So I thought they could have called this a lot of different things to convey the same idea, but they used the Paul is Dead. So at least one of the writers is my age or a little older. But now to dig into this episode, we are in the other reality. So let's talk about the realities for a second. I believe there are 3. We have the one where Alice doesn't speak Swedish and the one where she does, where the car is red and the car is blue, right? So we tend to call them the red reality or the blue reality. So in the blue reality, which is the one we normally see, that's the one with the blue car, the one we've been following Joe through. The cabin on the wall is the painting of the wounded angel. In the red reality, where they have the red car on the wall in the cabin is, and this is funny, because Alice refers to that painting as the Changeling, but the name of the painting is actually Devil by the Pot. And the devil in it is not a powerful evil entity. It's fairly slight, appears to be hungry because you can see his ribs, and he's basically stealing food. And would you feed the devil if he was hungry at your house? Now, there's a lot to be read into that painting, all of his paintings, but these are the ones we have. So those are the 2 main realities. In the red universe where we are now, we're in, the car is red. Paul is alive and Joe is dead, right? But in this universe, in this reality, Joe was not having an affair, right? Because our Joe that we've been following that didn't have the affair is the one from the red universe that has slipped through. She's in the wrong universe, right? Joe does not play the piano in the red universe. There's no piano in the house. This Alice speaks Swedish. Oh, and Paul's wife, her name is Erica in the red universe, not Frida. So we saw Joe at the gathering greet her as Frida, as Erica, and get corrected that her name was Frida. And in this episode, Paul comes home and greets his wife as Frida, and she has to correct him and say, "My name's Erica," which is really weird. If you think about, if you're in a relationship at all, consider having not seen them for a long time and calling your significant person the wrong name. So in that one instance, we would say that person handled it very, very well. But for the most part, I don't care for that character very much. So we revisit a lot of things that we've seen before and then some that we haven't because we're with Paul. But on board the space station before the accident, we're seeing Joe talk to Alice on the tablet in the pergola again. And the last thing she says to her before the accident, she's holding the tablet and she says, "Wave to yourself, Alice." And then the accident happens. So that's It's interesting because, it's not lost on me that her name is Alice. We could have called her many, many things. We called her Alice. And she carries around a white rabbit. So, considering all of the things from Alice in Wonderland, which is actually Through the Looking Glass, is the title of the book, we're going to have to draw those comparisons at some point. So the accident happens, and we do find out that in the red universe where Paul is surviving, there was no Cal experiment. He goes to get it and it's not there. He tells the astronauts he's sending back first in the second Soyuz capsule to report that he's lost the Cal. And they don't know what the Cal means. He says relay it, and then sends them. Just a note, the Cal, the cold atomic laboratory, is a thing. It's been on board the ISS since 2018, and they run experiments there a lot. And I believe they did find another state of matter, I think it was. I was falling down a rabbit hole and I stopped reading because I don't think it really matters to this show what we do in reality with the Cal, but the Cal is in fact a thing. So the accident happens, and we do see, so there's a couple of little things. We see Irina's cosmonaut dead body miss the ISS and just continue flying through space. We see Paul, Paul has to do all of the same battery switching and all that, and he doesn't lose the time that Joe lost. So he is 5 batteries complete with 4 hours to go. But I think the IIS was in a slightly different place for their accident than in the blue universe with Joe surviving, because that's why Irina missed the station. I think it's just time moving a little differently, or everything happening at a slightly different sequence. So we know that in the red universe, with Paul surviving, there is no Cal. He was working on something else. Clearly, there was an alarm that when Joe got home in the blue universe, they said never happened, right? She said she heard it, and then there was the collision. But in fact, she heard the alarm from the red universe, and then they got hit by Irina. Now, let's talk about Joe and the accident for a second, because whatever happens, the accident, and she is thrown weightless into the pergola that she was looking out with Alice, and she hits the glass and breaks it, and her eye is removed and sucked into space, and basically the contents of her head are sucked out into the vacuum of space. And then Paul has to pull her face free of the broken glass and then patch the hole, which he uses a baby wipe to do. Interesting choice. That's what he called for. Yeah. There's a lot of that little sequence that I'm not sure actually works that way. I don't know that in 0 Gs you can create enough momentum with a 100-pound person to break that window, let alone break it with her eye. But we did. She's dead. So, yeah, all right, I'm going to come back to that. I have something about Alice I want to talk about that I noticed in that scene, and then I went back. Oh, well, let's talk about it. So the 2 twins that are playing Alice, there is an easy way to distinguish between the 2 girls. And I had thought at first it might indicate which universe we were in. That one actress would be Alice in one universe, and the other actress would be Alice in the other universe. And the simple way to do it, and I'm sorry to do this to you because you're never going to unsee it now. One of the 2 of them has a little mole just above her lip on this side, right? It's little, not a big deal, but it's definitely only on one of the 2 girls. And at first I thought, oh, okay. So that's going to be one universe, and without is the other universe. And that is absolutely not the case. We have hired twins, and they are playing Alice when the shooting schedule required it. And the way I know that for sure is I went back and I watched the first episode again, where Joe is talking to Alice on the screen. And on one screen, she's horizontal, and it's one reality. And on the other, she's vertical, and it's the other reality. The sweater and pigtail Alice versus the ponytail blue jacket Alice. And neither of them have the birthmark or have the mole. So, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I thought we had a thing, and then we don't have a thing. We just have an actress that's doing the thing. So we end up, Paul is moving the batteries. He's getting ready to go. He keeps hearing Joe breathe. For the 45 minutes he's in the Soyuz capsule with the dead body, he can hear her breathing. And he keeps telling her to stop breathing. And that's one of the crossover things that Joe heard him say. Joe, you have to stop breathing. And I remember we talked about it when it happened, that would be an odd thing for him to say. He gets freaked out, and he does call down to Houston and ask for the protocol of dealing with a dead body. And when her face with that part missing is reintroduced to gravity, what's going to happen to all the liquid inside the body? And he decides to leave her behind, and they agree. So Paul has to, Magnus has to tell Alice that mom's not coming back. So during Paul's getting ready to come home, the dead body freaks him out a little bit, and he hears things like Joe was hearing things. And he takes the tablet and he records nothing, but the waveform of the recording is that of Joe making the recording that she made when she was sure she was going to die. And just in case, I'm making this recording. And she left the tablet, if you remember. We see Alice hiding in a cabinet, and Magnus looking for her and finds her. She has her iPad, and she's watching rocket catastrophes on YouTube. The one she referenced was it's a real one that happened. It killed a bunch of people on a launch pad in Norway, I think. I looked it up, and then I didn't write it down. Of course, I didn't remember. Anyway, it's a real one. He doesn't want her to immerse herself in the tragedy and all of the tragedies and just watch YouTube and all that. And I don't know what's wrong with YouTube. He finally leaves her alone, and she's banging her foot against the side of the cabinet, which is a sound we've heard before. And when she looks through the slats of the door, she sees a flashlight come and realizes it's Joe. And it's when we saw Joe on the space station hallucinate she was in the hallway walking down the hallway, this is her walking down the hallway. And Alice opens the door to run to her mother. And of course she opens the door and there's nobody there. So Paul was freaked out by the audio and does move the body back into Destiny out of the Soyuz. And as he's doing that, he's apologizing to her because he knows he's wrong. But as he pushes the weightless body, he takes her hand to guide her. And that's the moment that she becomes the Joe we've been following. And he's the Paul she saw when she touched his severed arm. So we have that moment again. So some of the cinematography in this is really good in its timing and its ability to have the effect on us that they wanted and bring us along in the story. I think it's all working pretty good. So when Paul tries to release the Soyuz to go home, the same problem that Joe had happens and the bolts don't release. Except Paul is in touch with ground control, and they say you need somebody on the other side to release the bolts. And he's mad and he keeps hitting the thing. He keeps pounding the dashboard. And of course, Joe, in this case, triggers the thing, releases the bolts. Paul launches to go home, and he looks back at the space station to see the silhouette of Joe watching him go. So now the question, when Joe looked out and saw the shadow, was it herself that she saw, or was it Paul? Because she didn't leave Paul behind. The only person we know that was left behind is Joe. So Joe saved Joe? So Paul returns, and it's funny, when Joe returned in the episode that when she landed out in the desert and they went to pick her up, Magnus and Alice were there. They drove out to the desert in Kazakhstan or wherever it was and ran to her on the stretcher. And everybody was around. In Paul's case, we see him in a van, and he gets out of the van, and then everybody greets him. And his daughter runs up and hugs him, and his wife comes and kisses him. And that's when he uses the wrong name. And she just says, "My name's Erica." So Paul is walking with, at times I thought they were crutches, and then I thought it was a cane. So I'm not sure, but he has the thing, whatever. And he's at Joe's memorial tree. I don't know if we really covered that that's what it was. They plant a tree in honor of the fallen astronaut, and they put a plaque. And it has her name in several languages, including English, so that we can know that that's what it is. And he places the flower, and another flower is placed, and when he looks up, it's Joe placing a flower at Paul's. And that's when she looks up and sees Paul, and they see each other. And then, of course, she's gone. So let me think. Is this a good place to talk about this? Yeah, okay. So red and blue are the two main realities we're dealing with. But in Henry's description of entanglement, he talked about it being white or black or white and black. And Irina, when she talked about entanglement, she talked about multiple things. And I think we've been seeing a third reality. And in cinematography terms, it's the one dominated by the color yellow. So we have the one that's red with the red car, Alice's red hat, and then the blue one with the blue car, predominantly blue, like my lights behind me. But then we've been seeing Alice with yellow pigtail ties, with a yellow couch, yellow lights in the place. And when we saw the strange Henry, when Joe stopped to see if Commander Caldera was okay, and he was talking to himself at his desk, and he was talking to himself in the reflection of the screen, and he didn't look right, and he didn't sort of act like Henry or Bud. The light in that room was very yellow, and I wonder if that's an homogenation of, is that a word, of the realities, and yellow is the one we're going to achieve, or similar. Sorry, something just jumped in my eye. So they're having a memorial for Joe, kind of. It's not the funeral, that comes up in a minute, but there is a memorial picture, and all the astronauts are sitting around in their astronaut jackets. And Alice asks Paul why he left her. And in really kind of a dick move, he actually tells her all the wrong things. You know, just as a grown up with a kid, you know better than to say the things he was saying to somebody who just lost their parent. And so Magnus takes Alice away. The other astronauts, whose names are all escaping me at the moment, not Yaz, but the other one, asked if he'd had his psych eval. So Paul looks out into the other room where Joe's memorial picture is, and he sees his memorial picture there. And then he snaps back to the reality he's in and continues. We see Alice walking outside, and she looks up at the window and sees Henry Caldera appear in the window, and he waves to her, almost like we saw him slip through reality to be here. We saw him see her, but I don't think he saw her seeing him when we saw him see her. It's very confusing. It's very confusing. But this is when she goes, and then right then is when she goes around and she throws the rabbit on the ground and starts stomping it, when the other Alice looking under the car sees her stomping on it. But then Wendy, Paul's daughter, comes up to ask her what she's doing. She's like, I don't want this shitty rabbit. And Wendy's all apologetic. But remember, we saw that she came around and Wendy had the rabbit. And it was all blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so it's weird that we're using the rabbit. Oh, and yeah, Alice takes it from her and rips the eye off it, throws it on the ground. It's a little harsh, but she just lost her mother. We see Paul at the same hearings that Joe had to go through, and he's testifying, for lack of a better word, about the events and what he was doing. And he says, I was on stage 6 of the cow. And I said, what's the cow? And he's like, what do you mean, what's the cow? It's a NASA experiment, blah, blah, blah. And there was no cow. So he doesn't know what that means. Why nobody will admit there was the cold atomic lab on the space station. He was doing something else. There was a different experiment. We see Alice, I guess, at home in Germany, and she looks at the gifts, I guess, that they had prepared for Joe's combination birthday Christmas, but she didn't come home. And so Alice tears up the rainbow picture and stomps on the gifts. She's very destructive and becoming very violent. Magnus does go to talk to the shrink, the psychiatrist. He thought he could handle it on his own because he's a teacher, but it's his own child, you know. And it's just beyond anybody's ability to deal with. So we see Paul struggling, obviously. We see him watching video of the Apollo 18 mission that Henry Commander Caldera was in command of. By the way, in real life, Apollo 17 was the final Apollo mission. There was no Apollo 18, so they get to make up whatever they want. They did a pretty good job making The astronaut looked like the actor playing Henry Caldera as a 20-something, 30-something-year-old man. So Paul, at the recommendation of the psychiatrist, has a funeral for Joe so that Alice can have closure. Alice doesn't see the point in saying goodbye to somebody that's never come back. She's not here. We can't say goodbye to her. But they have the funeral, and Paul is kind of an asshole to his daughter by telling her not to be an asshole and to talk to Alice. And Wendy goes and gets Alice and brings her back, says, "My dad thinks your mom's still alive." And everybody's sort of standing there staring at each other, not knowing what to do. And Alice comes down the stairs, the other Alice from the Blue universe. And Alice and Paul both look and see Alice and Joe. And Paul falls down. He didn't really faint. He lost his balance and fell. And we hear Alice scream. And then the Alice in the red universe, or reality, runs to where Joe was in the other reality and yells for her. And the whole funeral looks at her. So Magnus decides that maybe they need a break. And Alice insists they go to the cabin. She wants to go to the cabin. And Magnus says, "No, it's too cold up there. We're going to the cabin." And sure enough, they go to the cabin. And they get to the crossroads, that in the last episode we saw Joe get to, and she couldn't decide which way to go, so she drove straight across the lake, the frozen lake. Magnus gets to that same spot, and both directions are snowbound. He can't make the turn. So Alice says, "Drive across the lake." Magnus says, "I am not driving a car across a frozen lake." And she says, "Fine, we'll walk." And after a brief conversation, they walk. And what Magnus says is it's 2 kilometers. So they walked across 2 kilometers of icy lake. That will be cold. They get to the cabin. Magnus starts to make a fire. Alice comments on the painting on the wall, which is the devil by the pot, not Wounded Angel. But she calls it the Changeling, so maybe that's another difference. Like, its name in my reality, Blue, is Devil by the Pot, and in the red reality, it's something else. I could change it. So we see Paul has run away from home, and he goes to visit Bud Caldera. Now, I'm not sure where he was that he left home in the middle of the night and where we are with Bud, but he got there. He's sitting outside, and he goes and reads the mailboxes, and he knocks on the door, and Bud opens, and he says, "Commander Caldera." He said, "I prefer Bud." There's a conversation. Bud obviously doesn't understand why he's here. He does know him by name and says, "You just came back and you left a body up there." So he's aware. The conversation escalates a bit. Bud tells him to leave. Paul's looking for answers. Bud takes a gun out of a drawer and fires it. The last scene is Alice waking up in the cabin. Magnus is asleep. She goes to the front room, looks out the window, and sees the blue car pull up and sees Joe get out of the car. And then we see Alice recognizing Joe, and that's the end of the episode. Okay. Did Bud shoot Paul? Well, the title of the episode is Paul is Dead. So I'm going to say Bud killed him. That'd be 2 people we know that killed directly. There's a couple of other things I think I saw in this episode. I didn't, sometimes some of this stuff's hard to look at, but I'm pretty sure in this red reality, when Paul went in the space station and he floated past and they showed through the portal, I'm pretty sure what we saw was Finland and Denmark upside down. They were reversed from where we saw them when Joe said, "Wave to yourself, Alice," which Irina in Russian on the tapes in the car, remember, she was saying that the world is upside down. Maybe the world really is upside down. Maybe it is a mirror reality. I tried to look at Paul's license plate to see if I could read it or if it was in mirror to me, but I couldn't get a clear enough shot at it. And I'm not sure of any of that. So there are a few times through this episode that we see yellow, and we could have had a combination of realities. But I think that's really it. I don't like the character of Paul's wife, whatever we want to call her. She is unsupportive and kind of a bitch. The little girl seems okay. The actress is doing pretty good. You could see her trying to chew with her mouth open so that she could get yelled at for being. Not that the character was trying, but you could see the actress trying. Just hard to do when you've learned not to do it. So it's important. I think it's important, when I can't think of his name right now. The guy that in the blue reality Joe was having an affair with. In this red reality, when he asks why was the decision made to leave her body there, he's not asking about someone he's having an affair with. That it's a friend, it's a colleague. It's hard to keep those things straight as we move. I did think it was cool, and there is a thing I thought I saw too here. The other thing, when Alice was walking through the house in Germany and she looked at the window, I think she saw the reflection of Joe sitting at the piano behind her, and that's why she turned. And of course, it was the desk. We saw the turntable, the record player, but she could hear the music. She could hear Joe playing the piano in the other reality. So I'm not sure why Alice is so connected to this switching of reality. But like in the funeral where Alice saw Alice, and we were looking at Alice and the camera turned to see Alice, and they were both in the same room. I think that's where the usefulness of casting twins to play that is coming to fruition. I think that's really good. We only have 2 episodes left. Can you believe it? 2. So I think that's it for this one. Let me know what you're thinking. Like this video, lets me know I'm doing a good job. Subscribe, lets YouTube know I'm doing a good job. And hey, comment. Let me know what you're thinking. This is a very complicated show. Let's explore some of the possibilities. All right, that's it for me. My name's Sean. This is Sean's Take. See you next time.